A short intro to this video. I'm intrigued by this Calvin Parker Hickson abduction because I hope Mr. Parker doesn't mind, but I have a lot of respect for him. And he talks about not being formally educated, but I'm sure if he took an IQ test, he would be well above most people. Anyhow, the reason I'm so intrigued is I was in that area the same night. I was approximately the same age as him. I was just a kid. And me and my cousin used to go down to Mobile Greyhound Park. We thought we were going to make $1 million. And we had been down there and we were coming home and we were in separate vehicles. And back then, the interstate wasn't open. You had to come from Mobile, and I think you had to either go to Ocean Springs or Biloxi to get back on the interstate. You had to go through 90. And we were coming home, and it was the same night, but not the same day. It was approximately 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning. And we'd been drinking, and we were kids, and we pulled over this about a 3 or 4 mile stretch west of the river. This no man's land. It's marsh on both sides, so it's nothing there. So we pulled over to take a pause that refreshes, and we killed our motor, and he was following me, and we got out, and we just noticed that it was uneerily quiet. No, I didn't see a UFO. Nothing happened, but it was just that night was just. You couldn't hear any crickets. It was just total silence, no traffic. And usually the 18-wheelers and it was just, at the time we stopped, it was just like nothing was there, And it was just kind of haunting. We didn't stop but maybe 3 or 4 minutes. And then we got back in the car and continued on to Baton Rouge where we were from. But in the weeks following, all the hoopla and the media just kind of intrigued me because I was there that night, and like I say, didn't see anything, but I was in the area the same night it happened.
.com. And to share this incredible story of close encounter and alien abduction, tonight's special guest is Calvin Parker, one of the two subjects of this event. After almost 45 years, Calvin has now written a book about his story. The book is titled Pascagula, The Closest Encounter, My Story. Calvin Parker joins us directly from Mississippi. Hello, Calvin, and welcome to Veritas. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing great.
Well, thanks for being with me. You have been requested by many of our listeners, and I know you're getting calls from Fox News and everybody else to have you on. Why do you think this story is so relevant right now after so many years?
I don't understand that. I figured it would be forgotten. But one thing, most everybody involved in this story's passed away now. And there's just a few of us left that remember it, and a few witnesses left that remember it. And I think that's a lot of it. And that's the biggest reason I wanted to get it documented in the book, is because, I would hate to die and then the story not be fully told, or the truth not fully come out about the story. So, and that's kind of where I'm sitting. And it's like Philip said, all through the years, in my past, the press would change what I would say. They'd usually add to it a little bit, which it really didn't need any adding to, or they'd take away from it a little bit, or maybe not tell the story like it was. So when I got ready to do the book, I had talked to Philip, and he knew how I felt about it.
And that's Philip Mantle, your publisher.
Philip Mantle with a flying disc.
Right.
And he's been great. He hadn't changed anything. He won't even hardly change my spelling in there unless you just can't really make it out. And believe me, I didn't major in literature or nothing. I don't have much of an education, so I know it's been hard on him and taking a few licks over not changing things, but it really puts the story out there the way that I wanted it, more or less, and the way that it is, and the way that, and what a lot of the people saying that's read the book is, it's like sitting in a room with you. It's like talking to you. It's like living the story through you. And that's the way that I wanted it. I didn't pull any redneck out of it. We just left it like it was.
Well, it's interesting you say that because lately I asked the publishers to please send me ebooks, and which Philip did. And what I do, I just put it on text to speech on my side. And as you said, everything was coming raw. I feel like I was with you there. The way, the mannerisms, the whole thing was there.
Yeah, and I didn't really, at the time that I was doing the book, I really didn't think that part would go over good. But the thing about it, it's real. I mean, and people feel it being real when you tell your story, when you tell your life story. And I try to cover details that nobody would think about in the book and all. And so far, I've enjoyed doing it, and I've enjoyed talking with people and visiting about it.
Usually, Calvin, I read a bio for the guests that we have. And even though Charles is not here with us, he passed away a few years ago. I want you to give us some background of you and Charles so that the audience can get a better perspective of who you are.
Actually, Charlie Hickson really was not a friend of mine. He was a friend of my father's. But I spent a lot of time with Charlie as a child coming up, him and his family. He used to live in Sandersville, Mississippi, and we also lived in Sandersville. My father and him used to fish and rabbit hunt together. And in doing that, they would take the older kids, me and his sons and daughter, fishing with them, or they would rabbit hunt, and we would go rabbit hunting with them and all. And that's the way that I knew Charlie up until the time that I went to Pascagula to go to work for him. And I was working in the oil field. I had got a job there, and we was working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I didn't want to do that. I was fixing to get married that following November. So instead of doing that, my father told me, he said, why don't you call Charlie? He's working at a shipyard. That'd be a little more stable job for you. You have insurance. You have days off. You make good money. So I had some experience with welding and fabrication and all. So that's what I did. I called Charlie up, and he said, sure, being a friend of my father's and knowing him all his life, he said, sure, come on down. So I drove down, and Charlie said, look, don't even hunt you a place to stay right now. I have an extra bedroom. You just rent this room for me, $50 a week, and you move in here, and that'll give you time to hunt you and your future wife a place to live, and you kind of, just kick back and take it easy for a while. And that's what I did. And this was October, it was the weekend before October the 11th. This was back around the 6th or 7th or somewhere in there. So I moved in with Charlie, and then I came back down the morning. I went back home. Then I came back down the morning of the 11th, and we left and went to work together. I picked Charlie up in my car, and we rode into the Shaw Peters shipyard where we was working, and he got my paperwork filled out and all. We worked all day except for about an hour, doing paperwork. We was there all day long. And it was getting around 5 o'clock that evening, about quitting time, and it was hot. For an October today, it was, I guarantee you, 97, 98 degrees with 100% humidity factor. And that's kind of hard to believe for a lot of people, but, it just that hot that time of the year. He said instead of going home and eating and taking a shower and going to bed, he said, why don't we go wind down a little bit and we just go fishing? Because we all love to fish, and he knew that. And I told Charlie, I said, look, I didn't bring no fishing equipment. I come down here to work. I bought work boots and work clothes. He said, I got plenty of equipment. And I remember thinking back on it, that's highly unusual to borrow someone's
It's like borrowing
fishing
a wife.
Oh, yeah, same thing. Down here, you get away faster with borrowing a wife than you will with fishing equipment. So we went and got the equipment and left and drove over it was about a 15-minute drive to the shipyard, to the place he was talking about. Now, I've never fished down here on the coast, so I wasn't real familiar with it. He told me how to get here, and he said, there's a grain elevator, or used to be a grain elevator right here, or was a grain elevator, and they would unload grain off this elevator, and it would fall into the water, and that would attract the fish, and they just stayed around there waiting on something to eat. Well, when we got to the site where it was, I looked out through there, and I noticed the shipyard was abandoned. So it must have been out of business for a good while. I never asked anybody, but I knew they wasn't conducting business there at the time, because it was a lot of tall grass,
weeds everywhere.
Right. And then it looked like a garbage dump where people just back down through there and throw out their old washing machines and beds and mattresses and all that. But what had happened, I asked Charlie about that. I said, why don't they clean this mess up? He said, because that's really not what people throw out. When the water gets up here on the coast, it comes over the land sometime if you got a little storm or the water gets real high. And then when it comes up on the land, it brings all this debris with it. When it goes out, it leaves it where it was. And they just hadn't done any cleanup since this place been out of business. So I was satisfied with that. It really didn't matter to me anyway. So we started making our way down to where we was fishing, and it took a good 15, maybe 20 minutes to walk through that debris, and it wasn't but about 300 foot, about the length of a football field, to where we was going to fish. There was no steel pier. So we finally made it down there, sat down and started fishing a little bit. Just started fishing. And I was looking out across the river. We was on the east bank of the river. And if you look across the river, there used to be an old NOAA station or a Coast Guard station. And I believe it was an old Coast Guard ship there. And I was thinking to myself, how in the world does something made out of steel that big float? And that's exactly what I was thinking at that moment when it come in. And then I noticed some blue lights coming from behind us, reflecting off across the top of the water to the ship. Now, this craft was sitting in behind us close to where we had parked, except it was about 50 foot further out from my car. And I thought to myself, I told Charlie, I said, I believe the law's back there. They fixing to make us move because we trespassing or something. Because I did see an old trespassing sign up when we walked down there. It wasn't up real good, but it was one there. And we stood up and turned around and looked. And gosh, when we looked, it was scary. All of a sudden, it was a bright light. You just really couldn't see anything. I mean, it was so bright that it blinded you when it appeared. And what I figured, I didn't know right then, but what I figured out by now, the door, it must have been the door when it opened on the craft, and this was coming from the inside of the craft.
What time of the day was this, Calvin?
It was just barely getting dark, so I figured it was probably around 5 o'clock. Neither one of us had a watch. It was a little after 5 because it took about 15 minutes to get home and 15 more minutes to get back to the shipyard, about 15 minutes to walk down there. So it was going on probably close to 6 o'clock, the best I can estimate. No exact time because, like I say, we didn't have a watch. So it took just a minute to be able to see anything besides that, but I seen 3 figures floating. And when I say floating, literally floating across the top of that debris, well, that scared the living daylights out of you. So I kind of glanced around to both sides looking for a place to run, and it was water and debris on the left, water and debris on the right, because they'd pull them ships up in them deals. And I knew what was in front, a bunch of debris and water, and it would have been more dangerous to jump off into that river than it would, I thought, to run the way that we came in. But we didn't have time to run. They was there just a fraction of a second, it seemed like. So 2 of them got a hold of Charlie, and one of them got a hold of myself. And that's when I felt like an injection into my arm, or heard a noise like a psh, noise, and felt, then all at one time I just felt real relaxed. So that's why I figured it was an injection, and I'll get more into that when I get to the story tomorrow about the hospital. So that just relaxed me, but it also kind of paralyzed me, and I wasn't able to turn or turn my head anyway or move in any way. And we automatically, when he got a hold of me, he automatically levitated us off the ground. And I was thinking to myself, I had my clear thoughts about me, and I was thinking, why didn't this break my arm or something? You know, I wasn't real big back then, about 160 pounds, but it should at least snap my arm or felt a little pain involved, but it didn't. It's just like we come up, just like we floated up with him. And we started going toward the craft. Well, again, I couldn't look to either side. All I could do was just see straight ahead of me. When we got to the craft, I caught myself looking, and I was real relaxed at this time because I just wasn't worried about nothing. I didn't, as I say, he gave me an I don't care pill. But I was looking inside the craft, and I was also trying to see if I could see Charlie, and I couldn't see Charlie, not in front of me or nothing. And all I could do was just look straight ahead. But I was looking for light fixtures or something. That's how bright the lights were coming out. And when we went in, it looked like the walls were just extruding lights out. It looked like all the lighting was coming out of the walls for some reason. And there was no light fixtures that I could see. So this big ugly creature that I call him made a left turn and then a right turn, and took me into a little room, and I call that the examination room. And they laid us out on what could have been a table, or they might have just stretched us out there. I didn't see a table now, but they put us on something, and I was laid on about a 45-degree angle in this room, so it got my vision where I could kind of turn my eyes, roll my eyes each way and look around to see what I could see. And that's when I got a pretty good look at what had me. Up until then, I really didn't understand what had a hold of me. And he let me go, and I couldn't move off that table. So while I was there on the table, I noticed he backed up at the back of the room, and this different little creature come out, or little humanoid come out. And I'm saying it was a female. I don't know to this day what it was, if it was male or female or what it was, but it come out of another little room and approached me, and I could just turn my eyes and kind of see her or it, and it was a little more human looking than what this thing that come got us was. Now the one that brought us in moved mechanically. It was you could tell by the way that it was moving, it might have been a robot or some kind of soldier or something, because everything was just a jerk move, and, you know, it wasn't real well coordinated like a human would move. But this other one moved more like a human, you know, the way that she or it moved its arms and touched. Well, she got a hold of my face. Well, first when I was laying there, she backed up just a little bit. Now, I couldn't see if she was floating or walking or what was going on there. And something came out of the ceiling about the size of a deck of cards. And this thing stopped about a foot above my head. And then it started revolving around my head, and I heard it go click, click, click 4 times. And then it got up in front of my face again and went straight back up into the wall. And that's when she come out and took her hands. And I did notice her fingers was a little longer than, human fingers. And she grabbed me by my cheek and pulled my mouth open, looked up in my mouth, pulled my nose back, looked up in my nose. And then I was starting to get kind of scared then. I was really starting to panic again for some reason. And it was just like she said, don't fear. We're not going to hurt you. But her mouth never moved. It just, she kind of thought it. And then that's relaxed me again for just a second. And that's when the old big ugly one, what I call it, came back in. And she mumbled something from the bottom of her throat. You could tell. And it was like a gunk, gunk. And he grabbed hold of my arm again. And automatically it was just like it was when he picked it up. I was just got real relaxed. And he floated us back out to the river. And that was amazing to me, because going back out, I could see a little better because of the bright lights had already dimmed, going back out to what I could coming in. And that was amazing to me, just going over the top of that marsh grass and all that old trash looking up through there. And he set me down, and I was not able to move, but he set me down, and my arms was facing the river, stretched out. So that's when I heard Charlie again for the first time, and boy, was I relieved. He said, Calvin, you okay, son? And when he said that, it was just like whatever they had given me had wore off, and I was able to stand up and turn around and look. And by the time we turned around and looked, he did with me, the door to that craft closed. Or that's what I'm assuming happened. The door closed and the bright light went away. And this thing just shot up into the air a little bit and made a little zipping noise and left. I mean, it disappeared. So that was the end of what happened there. So Charlie said, let's sit down and talk about this for a minute. And I was wondering, how's he holding his cool right here and all this going on and just happening? But he was a good deal older. He was, I think, 40 years old. And I was still just a kid, so I took his advice. We sat down there and talked a minute. And I said, Charlie, I don't want to tell nobody about this. This did not happen. I don't want nobody to know. Let's go back to the house and just forget it ever happened. Oh, you're right, son, but I got to tell somebody. I said, don't tell nobody, Charlie. I said, I'm fixing to start a new life in November. I'm getting married. And I don't want my future wife or her family or my family to know anything about anything that happened here, because everybody's going to think we're two idiots sitting around. And he said, we got to tell somebody. He said, I'm calling Keesler. Now, Keesler is the Air Force base in Biloxi, Mississippi. And you would think that they would be able to deal with all this, because they handle many planes coming in and out of there. And but we went back to the car. We made our way, and believe me, it didn't take the full 15 minutes to get back to the car that time. I grabbed his spinning reel, like you say, because if you'd left it, it'd been like leaving his wife laying out on the pier. So I grabbed that spinning reel, and he grabbed his. We hauled butt back to the car. And when we got to the car, I noticed on the passenger side of the car, the windows was cracked, but the window was still in place. And that was both just on the passenger side, the windows there. And that was a brand new car. It was a 73 Rambler Hornet. And I was curious why the window cracked, but I figured noise might have cracked it. But I was, again, curious why the glass stayed in place. It was hanging there, but you could see the cracks. And somebody told me later on, one of the manufacturers of the car and a mechanic, he said, well, that's safety glass in there. It's got that plastic. And until you punch it, that's
tempered glass.
Right. It won't let it fall out and cut you in case you have a wreck. So that made good sense to me. But getting back to the story.
Now, what caused the crack, though?
I'm figuring that craft being so close, because we was, I would say, 50 foot from where this thing landed. That was the only place it could land back there. And it was probably parallel and about 50, 60, 75 foot from us. Now, the next thing that amazed me, I hadn't even made the first payment on that car. That was a brand new car. And I got in to crank it. And I figured I'd panicked or something, trying to crank it might have flooded it, but I didn't, I remember trying to turn it over and crank it. And it was probably 15 minutes before we got the car cranked. And by all rights, that battery should have been dead in the car, but it wasn't. It was just as strong as what it always had been. And we finally got it cranked. It didn't run right, but it did run. It kind of backfired and putted around a little bit. So we started to leave. He said, "Now we gotta stop and call Keesler Air Force Base. We got to do that." I said, "Charlie, let's not tell nobody, please. Just keep your mouth shut." So nobody know but us. Now I didn't know that there was eyewitnesses on the bridge driving over and all then, but they didn't know we was down there. He said, "Well, we got to tell." So I said, "Okay." Well, back then there was no cell phones, no media, social media or anything. So if you made a phone call, you had to stop at a store where there was a payphone or something. And we have blue laws here in Mississippi then, and everything shuts down. They fold up the sidewalks at dark. You can't buy a soda pop, you can't buy a beer, you can't buy nothing. So it's almost a ghost town when you're going into towns and all. So we found a little store, and I'm saying, I really got in my mind it was a Magic Mart store. I'm not for sure, but that was real popular back in. And we pulled up to it, and Charlie got out and made the phone call. He called Keesler Air Force Base, and they said, "Well, we don't, fool with nothing like this. Y'all need to call your local authorities." So
did they mention Project Blue Book or anything like that?
They did. They said that was over with. None existed then, that they got out of the UFO business, whoever he talked to.
Of course. So they say.
So they say. And this is what Charlie told me. I didn't hear that first-handed, but, he had no reason to lie to me about it. So he told me that they told him to call the local authorities, and he called the sheriff department because he come back to the car, and we scratched around and found another dime. The phones was taking dimes in, and he put another dime in and called the local sheriff department, and they told him, "We just sit where we are, don't move, don't do anything, just stay right where we were." So I know what they was thinking. They was thinking we was two drunks or doped up or something, and we was trying to play a game with them. So they wanted to get there before we got in the car and drove off, so we wouldn't hit nobody with a car or kill them. So it wasn't just a minute. They come pulling up, and I mean, they pulled up hot and fast when they did. And they walked around to each side of the car, and one of them just looked in the car. They didn't get inside the car right then, but they looked in the car and asked me to step out. And I assumed that they did Charlie because I heard him open the door over there.
Quick question, Calvin. I don't mean to interrupt you. How much time did it pass from the moment you were taken until this moment?
I would say 30 minutes. Time we drove to the store, and he called Keesler and got them off the line. Time he called them, and it took him probably 10 minutes to get there.
So the abduction experience was only just a few minutes, or was there missing time involved?
No, it was probably, the abduction was probably close to 45 minutes to an hour. So that we was in
real time, not missing time, because they can bend time, and some people are taken for 8 hours and it feels like 10 minutes.
No, this was real time. This time,
okay.
Now it's another one that went on in '93, and I'll tell you about that here in a minute. But this time, this was real time, probably about 45 minutes to an hour. And like I say, we didn't have a watch. Neither one of us did, because we worked around welding, and, it would spark and get on the lens of the watch and all. Because somebody mentioned one time, well, everybody wears watches. Well, if you do a lot of welding or shipbuilding, you don't, because you use a sledgehammer and a welding machine and a cutting torch, and, it just don't stand up.
Right.
They sweat a lot. So when they got there, they pulled me out and told me to stand on one foot and bend back and touch my nose and jump up and down and count to 10 and count backwards and do a lot of these field sobriety tests that they do. They think you're drinking. Then walk a line and just little things like that just to check us. Well, they must assume that we wasn't drinking, and we weren't. So he said, well, follow us to the sheriff department. We need to talk to y'all. So I said, no problem. And we got in a car and followed them to the sheriff department. So they let us drive over there. And they went in front of us. They didn't follow us. We got to the sheriff department, and they took Charlie into an interrogation room. They took me into a different interrogation room, started asking a lot of questions and all. And I would just more or less tell them I don't remember, I don't know, because I didn't want it to get out that nothing like this had happened. And then they put us in the room where I messed up with the media, and I didn't know the tape recorder was in the room, but Charlie and I talked about it between ourselves. And they had a tape recorder in this room, and they calling that the secret tape. And they listened to this tape recorder, so they knew that I was on there with Charlie, because I was going to tell them I didn't see nothing, that he must be crazy. But it didn't work out that way. So anyhow, they come in, they sent the big sheriff come down, Fred Diamond, and he said, look, fellas, he said, y'all need to go home and get some rest. We're going to go out and see what's going on. And y'all just go ahead and drive home and take it easy. So we did that night. But I remember while we was driving home, I was telling Charlie, look, I feel like we could be contaminated with something, some kind of virus, maybe radiation or something like that. Charlie said, don't worry about it. I said, well, we could kill a lot of people if they give us a disease and it goes into airborne stuff. And I didn't know much about all that, but I knew you could get the flu and all. So he said, don't worry about it.
Were you tested for radiation exposure?
We were the next day.
Okay.
So we went home that night. I took all my clothes. Now, they didn't have plastic garbage bags back then. If they did, you couldn't afford them. But there was a paper bag that I had brought with me from Laurel, some old clothes in. I took everything I had off, all the way down to my shoes and socks, and I put them in that bag. I went in and took a shower, and I poured bleach over myself, thinking that if anything was on me, that bleach would kill any kind of disease or anything that was there. And washed that off, and I took that bag and I threw it in the dumpster outside at the apartments. And I wish I hadn't have then, because there was some blood on them clothes that would have helped us, I believe, later on with a little DNA or maybe something. They might, of course, they didn't have DNA then, but looking back on it, if I'd saved them now until they did have DNA, they might could have done a DNA test and found out where they was from, or maybe what they were, or if they had any human features to them or anything like that.
And that blood, was that your blood? And how did it come out? Why?
Well, when she was messing with my nose, for some reason, I used to have frequent nosebleeds. And when she was running her finger down my throat and trying to come up my nasal cavity, I was bleeding a little bit right then and all. But, it was on her hands, too. If she didn't have gloves on, I didn't see no gloves. So it could have been, some kind of DNA left there on my shirt or something. So who knows, you make all kind of mistakes when you're scared. And you didn't hear about this stuff back then. Up until this happened, I had no idea what a UFO or an alien was. If somebody said, well, did you see a UFO? I would have probably thought it was some kind of fish or something. I didn't know what a UFO was. And it just makes it hard. Everything was a lot simpler, what I'm trying to say, back then than it was now. You had 3 TV stations, ABC, NBC, and CBS. You had 3 main guys in the media. And, that's all you had. And if you watched TV, you watched either the Wizard of Oz or the president talking. And we was going kind of through, all that right then. I didn't ever watch TV because we always worked out in the fields or something, had our chores that we had to do. So we went on into the apartment, and the next morning I got up. Well, I really didn't sleep any, but I heard Charlie and them in there, Charlie and his wife in there, and I wasn't for sure if Charlie had told his wife about this or not. So I wasn't going to bring it up. But before we left the sheriff's department, let me go back to that part. I told the sheriff, Fred Diamond, which was sheriff at the time, I said, please don't tell nobody about this. He said, and I remember just as good as day him saying, we're not reporters. We're here to investigate crime and for criminals and to work crime scenes. He said, so don't worry about that. But by golly, somebody told him. And the way I figured, we got up the next morning then, and me and Charlie got up and drove on into work. He said, you want some breakfast? I said, no, I'm not going to eat here. And there was a little store called Wayne Lee's that was open back then that fixed something quick for breakfast. You could stop there and grab a biscuit or whatever you want. And just ate it on the way to the shipyard. Now, that's what I did, but I didn't eat it. I just left it in the sack and left it in the car. We got to the main gate at the shipyard, and I noticed there was more cars there than what it was the day before. I mean, you couldn't even find a parking place. And I thought, damn, they must have meetings today. And we got out and got our brass. Back then, and you didn't have a time clock. You took your little brass and it had a number on it, and you handed it in at the gate where you walked in, and that was your time clock. They wrote down on the tablet what time you walked in that gate. Then when you come out that evening, you picked it up, and they wrote down what time you left. So we brassed in, went to a workstation, and we wasn't there just a minute. We got a call from the main office. So for Charlie and I to come to the office, I said, oh, Lord, they know something. And I got sick on my stomach. I remember getting down in the parking lot and throwing up in the parking lot because I was so sick about all that. So when we got to the office, they said, fellas, we don't know what happened last night, but the media is driving us crazy. They call in our phones. They're here at the doors. We cannot conduct any kind of business with you two here on this job. And they said, we need to know what happened. So we told the main guy there. He called in a lawyer, Joe Camingo, then to handle the press and to try to get them out of his office. So he made Joe Camingo, we told him, and he got a press release worked up and turned out the press release. But they all knew they knew the story to start with. It was hundreds of them coming in. They bombarded us there.
Who leaked it? Was it the sheriff?
Well, it was either him. I don't think Charlie did because he didn't know anybody to leak it to. But what I kind of figured was back then, the only thing that people had, they didn't have their cell phones and all, and computers, was scanners, police scanners, and they scanned the fire department and police department. And I'm thinking that somebody probably heard that on one of their scanners. And when you do that, everybody runs to the sheriff's department to see what happened, and they probably told them, what had happened, because it was probably some kind of press there. So, but I really don't know till today who leaked all this out. There's one of the deputies that's still alive here, and I'm supposed to see him October 11th. I have a book signing, and he wanted to see me, and he's supposed to be there at the book signing, and I wanted to talk to him and find out how they found out or what he knew about it or something like that. So I'm waiting to ask him. I'm all rigged up for it anyway. But Joe Camingo, their attorney, and the shipyard, they told us if you go back on the yard, the people that work there is going to want to know what happened. So it's going to take time away from all their work, and we're not paying y'all to sit around and talk. They was real good to us. They was nice to us. and we can't conduct business in this office. So they turned us over to the attorney. Well, the attorney set up for us to go to the hospital to get it. I told him while he was interviewing us and all about my fear of being exposed to some kind of disease and radiation and all that. So he called the local hospital here, and then he called Keesler Air Force Base and got us set up for a radiation check. So first thing, we went to the hospital, and they gave us a pretty good examination and all, and they looked at my arm, and they seen where that was, and they said it kind of looked like a puncture mark or a split with a puncture mark from an air needle, you know, where, because they used to give the military injections, and they would use air guns, you know, just put a gallon of medicine on the end of an air gun, pull a trigger, and it would shoot air and the medicine into your arm, and if you moved, it would split it. So that's what they said that kind of looked like. And they did some blood work and things like that, which all the medical records and all got destroyed during the hurricane because they didn't have them on computers so they could send them off to wherever they send them to and keep them on file. They had hard copies, and, you know, we had 20 foot of water down here on the coast at that time. So we went there, we got our examination, and the sheriff department had us in their car. One of the detectives there, he was carried us these places. And so we left there and we went over to Keesler. And I noticed when we got to Keesler, they had guys that had these radiation suits on, is what I found out they were now. But they had these suits on with Geiger counters, and they separated us from the people in the car. And we walked up, and they went over us with the Geiger counters and all. And they finally said, well, y'all clear. And they pulled their little mask off, and they said they want to see you inside. And that's where the meeting from Keesler come up. They must have been, I don't know how many people that was involved in that meeting, but it was a lot of high-powered brass in there, a lot of local authorities in there, like your mayors, your police department, your sheriff department. And they took us in and they interrogated us. They was extremely nice when we was in there, and they asked questions and we answered them. And a matter of fact, the minutes are in the book. Philip was able to get his hands on the minutes at Keesler, what they interrogated us about. So after that, they put us back in the patrol car and took us back to the shipyard. And they told us they didn't want us back there for a couple of weeks, that they'd pay us vacation pay or something to take off. Of course, I wasn't there long enough to get one. And they cut me a check, but I didn't cash a check because I didn't feel like it was fair to cash these guys' check and me just to work there one day. And I knew I wasn't going back. And that's when I left, and that evening, well, no, I didn't leave that evening. The next day, Dr. John Allen Hynek and Dr. Hodder came down on their own, and they said, well, we got some people wanting to meet y'all in the morning. So if y'all would come back here, then we'll cut y'all check and y'all could go. And that's what we did. We went back there, and that's when John Allen Hynek flew down on his own dime, and Dr. Harder from the University of California flew on his own dime to come down and talk to us. And they was down there almost the day after this happened. And as far as I know, I don't know that the sheriff department went over where this happened or not, but I know John Allen Hynek did and probably took pictures because I heard them talking about it. So, you know, it's just really hard to say. Everything was happening so fast then that it wasn't. So Hynek interrogated, or didn't interrogate us. Hynek questioned us, asked us a lot of things. Dr. Harder tried to hypnotize me. He would get me under, then he'd have to bring me back because of the fear factor. And I think he did hypnotize Charlie at this time there. So, but anyhow, I remember his closing statements, and he said, I don't know what these men seen, but I know it was something. He said if they was actors, they should be in Hollywood. That's just how good they are. He said, but something happened. And as far as I know, they went out to the site and looked at it, and we left and went our separate ways, and I went back to Laurel. And
is that the only time that you met with these two professors, scientists?
It was, and I hate that. I had no idea who they were, to be honest with you. I just thought it was some old man with a beard come down there to be a nosy or a newspaper or something. But I had no idea who Dr. Heineck was. And I guess Heineck and Harder both are passed away now. I don't know.
Yeah, they were both the authority on UFO investigations back then.
Yeah, and I wish I had known it. I would have loved to talk to them a little more. Like I say, back then, I didn't know nothing about UFOs. I thought they was just reporters. And actually, what I thought, to be honest with you, Ingalls Shipyard is just probably down the river just a little ways from that. And I thought it might be something they was experimenting with at the time. And, the two rednecks just out playing a joke on somebody. But I wish it had been that, that would have been a lot easier. And somebody asked, well, you got a tow bridge here and a guy in it, and you got a tow bridge over there and a guy in it, and shipyard's got cameras. What the idiots don't realize, the shipyard didn't have cameras. Back in the 70s, there wasn't no such thing. Nowadays, you can't walk to somebody's doorstep without being on a surveillance camera. They don't have them there. The guy not a tow bridge, but the bridge to let it out, and the only time he has to let it up is when a big ship comes through, and that time of the night they don't come through there. But the sheriff department went back to talk to him to see if he seen anything, and they had to wake him up. He was in a recliner, leaned back, listening for his radio so he'd know if a ship come, so he could open that up. So they said it really wasn't much reason to talk to him because he'd been sleeping the whole time. And of course the train trestle, the only time, and it was a train track down from there, which they didn't leave manned all the time. They had a schedule of the trains, so they let the tracks up. And then somebody lived close by, when they would get in time for a train, they would come over and let the tracks down. And when the train passed, they'd let it back up. So it wasn't even manned that night, because I did look down that way and it was straight up in the air. So, a lot of people that didn't live around here, this come from the Rolling Stones magazine. Now, how in the world would they know something sitting in New York and not coming down themselves to investigate all this? Which is, they took attention, and I imagine did what everybody else did, just write down hearsay, what they heard. And that's one thing that really turned me off with reporters, and that's why I never really talked to them in the past. And if I did, I'd just sit up there and tell them something, whatever they wanted to hear, and go. I had one come up, me having company that I hadn't seen in 2 or 3 years. We was sitting on the back porch, and a reporter with the Associated Press showed up unannounced, barged his way in, and what I should have done was took a ball bat and beat him down and give him something to write about. He sat there and took pictures of me the whole time and wanted to conduct an interview, and I thought to myself, conduct an interview, Calvin, get rid of it, then he'll leave, and that's it. But, it's just wild stuff that happened after that.
Did the media, well, at least until recently, if you appear in the media, usually when it comes to these topics, they ridicule you. They ridicule you, they mock you, they change the story. Have you found some media personalities, lately, not alternative media like us, but mainstream, that respect your story the way it was without changing it?
I've had articles come out in some of the national papers around here, and I got an interview this coming Friday with Fox News on Waters World.
Hey, Jesse Waters, he's good.
Yeah, and I talked to him, and he is really interested in that, and he assured that what was said is said. That's locked in, that's done. Because that's like I told him, go ahead, because I'll hang the phone up on you, buddy. I'll put the microphone down and walk out. But I'm not going to do that either. But his producer called just this morning, said he is really serious about this. He wants to talk to you bad. Because actually, I didn't want to do the interview because, I think there's more important news out there than this. But then you wonder if maybe this isn't important news. They got this space army they coming up with and stuff like that. Maybe they know something we don't know.
Well, look at the Space Force. Look at the closure of the Solar Observatory in New Mexico, and there's so many conspiracy theories out there. My goodness. I mean, they talk about maybe we saw aliens, maybe we saw a UFO craft, maybe there's a solar flare coming our way. There's so many, speculative questions that when it comes to this topic, it becomes popular again.
It's very popular, and I didn't realize that. Actually, I had no plans of writing a book or anything, but to my family and my friends, I really owed them one, and the people that lived here on the coast, because I've never sat down and talked to nobody about this. I just turn around and walk off. I had one good friend the other day. We was sitting there talking, and he said, "Where you been? You haven't been around lately." I said, "Well, I've been writing a book." "What you been writing a book about?" Well, I told him. Well, he knew pretty much that something had happened, but we never talked about it. He said, we've told each other many lies. You've lied to me about your fishing and stuff like that. He said, but you never lied to me about this UFO because we never talked about it. I said, you're right. And I said, now if you want to hear about it, buy the book. So that's kind of how I left it. So he went out and bought it, and he was just amazed. He said, there's enough evidence in here if you went to a court of law to prove this in a court of law. You got eyewitnesses, you got polygraph tests, you got voice stress tests, you got all these eyewitness accounts, you got the Coast Guard as a witness. And he said, it's enough evidence to go in a court of law.
And that's one thing I have to tell you, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I was amazed at the amount of evidence. You have letters from the government, the U.S. Air Force. The transcripts are right there with every single person who was involved. We're talking about high-ranking military officers. And it's every single piece of evidence of what transpired you have. I mean, what do you have to gain from all of this?
Well, number one, I felt, as I said before on another show one time, there's an expiration date on my head, and I don't want to die and leave this story untold. I think right now it's too important. And if I did, it would leave so many people in the air. It would leave my family in the air, my friends. It would leave the people that lived around here when this happened. It would leave this thrown up in the air. They deserve to know the truth. And it's like Philip said, you could talk to a reporter all day long, and they could change anything you say. But if you put it in a book and you document it and it's there, then they can't change your words because it's in a book. And he was right, and that's what really convinced me of that. So, I just want to get the truth out there because people have wondered all this time, my family, my parents, my sisters, my brothers, people that I live around, and I've never talked to my good friends and all about it. And I had just a handful of friends when this happened because I didn't trust people. And the handful of friends that we got, most of them kind of lived out of town, and everybody would come down. They have summer camps here, and they would come down and get on their houseboats and in their camps, and we'd visit all summer long. We'd fish together, we'd swim, go swimming, we'd have cookouts on holidays, and we never talked about this. I could tell, once we sat down and had 2 or 3 drinks, they might want to talk about it, but that's the last time I wanted to talk about it, is when I had that truth serum. So I owed it to the people, and my brother-in-law, he was coming down in the past few months before I decided to write a book. He would come down and hear people talking about it up at the station. They'd talk about Calvin Parker. Well, they didn't even know he was there or knew me. And that was my brother-in-law, him and his daughter. And they would say, well, that guy that was on the UFO, he's never been around here. And he would start questioning them, and he'd tell them, well, look, that's my brother-in-law. And they was out fishing on a pier one night. There was somebody there, and they was watching a light. And this guy said, back a long time ago, I remember my daddy telling me there was somebody right here close to this same pier that got picked up by a UFO. And he told him, he said, well, that was my brother-in-law. And I even put that little part in the book, what they said. But people just are hungry. They're starving for this kind of information now. And that's why I'm looking so forward to this book signing coming up October 11th. There's people coming from all over the United States and just want to talk and visit and sign books. So I'm going to make a point to get there a little early myself so I can walk around and visit with them and, see what's going on, answer some of their questions. And I'm ready to talk about it.
By the way, I haven't been interjecting that much, folks. If you have noticed, that's not my style. But because of the importance of this story, I wanted Calvin Parker to just give us the perspective that he had, unimpeded, uninterrupted. And what I want to do in segment 2, and by the way, Calvin has allowed us to have an extra time if we have to, because I want to dissect step by step in chronological order. I have a list of questions that I have after reading the book, which, by the way, I really enjoyed. I couldn't put it down. It's filled with information, and even more than I expected. But also, your friend, your father's friend, your friend too, Charles Hickson, he wrote a book years ago. He passed away. And I happen to have 3 copies from an estate that I bought years ago, signed by you and him. Did he tell his story, and does it match yours? And I say this respectfully, I don't mean that there's a discrepancy, but did he have a different experience in that craft than you did? And I want to get your response when we come back to the second segment. How can people buy the book? And this October 11th book signing, tell us more about that, location, and so on.
Okay. People want the book because it's in a language they can understand. It's unedited. It's strictly in my language. And that's the way Philip and I agreed to do the book. I mean, he didn't want to change nothing that I said because I had told him and we had talked that every time, I would tell a reporter something, they would glamorize the story or what they thought would glamorize it, make it more interesting.
Or sensationalize it.
Right. And that's not the way that it was. The way it is, what happened is what happened, regardless of what happened. And I wanted it in my words, in my memories, and my thoughts, and that's the way that it was. And so far it's gone real well. People, have made comments that it's just like sitting in their living room and talking to me and us talking about this and like them being there. And it's got some bad publicity too. They kind of down on Philip a little bit, which is not his fault, on some of the stuff that he didn't edit just right. And he wasn't supposed to edit it. That was my fault. That ain't Philip Mandel's fault. So, if it's a misspelled word, it's because Calvin Parker misspelled it and did it that way and wanted it that way. Or a misprint, he wouldn't even change. There was one place in there where I said I was going to eat a bologna sandwich, and it turned out to be a blondie sandwich. He didn't even change that, And your mama said, well, when we was proofing the book, she said, well, there's a place in there, you talking about eating a bologna sandwich, but you got blondie sandwich. I said, well, I know. But that's the way that it is. That's the way I put it down that night, and that's the way I want it. And it would have upset me if it had been changed. And Philip knew all this, so he stayed well with my wishes, and I really appreciate him for it. And he's been a great publisher, and he has helped me a whole lot on this. He has got documents from everywhere that I didn't even know exist. He even come up with a tape from Bud Hopkins where Bud Hopkins hypnotized me, and I didn't even realize I'd been hypnotized. It was new to me when I first got the tape. Then my memory started coming back. I never listened to the tape, but when he mentioned it, then it kind of released my memory pieces of it in there, and it's coming back. And as I get to that part where I remember, I'll listen to the tape, and it's dead on. And I didn't know Bud Hopkins from anybody, and he said he's a well-respected in this field, and he's good. And Bud done right by me. I like Bud.
He passed away, you know that, right?
I do know that, and I hated to hear that because I really liked him. And I think Philip got the tapes from David Jacobs.
Right, Dr. David Jacobs, correct.
Right, and he had them on file, and he sent them to Philip to put up, transcribe, and put into the book. Well, Philip asked his permission to make a disc for me and him out of them, and he gave us permission. So Philip mailed me a disc so I could hear it my own words. And the amazing thing about that, when I got it, I was shocked. I really was. I did not realize I had been hypnotized. I went to this place thinking, well, you know, he can't hypnotize you. There's no way this man's going to hypnotize me. But he did, and I didn't know about it. He put a post-hypnotic suggestion in my head that I wouldn't remember anything until I was able to deal with it and able to remember it and had a need to deal with it. And as this need got more and more toward me doing the book, then the need come on, and I needed to remember. And that's when I went back and started remembering. And that's just Linda Howe interviewed me the other day, and she brought something up that I didn't even know about that was on these tapes. And I still wouldn't let myself go back and listen to the tape right then. And then it started hitting me. It come like a nightmare at night in my sleep. And I got up and I turned the tape on because I remembered it then. And I turned the tape on and I got up to that part right there, and it was dead on it. So,
and that's what I want to do in part two, because I know there's a lot of questions